The thing that we achieve most is our own children. I mean, in my own life, I would say that the most important achievement I've got as a mark would be my 3 children. It's much more important than anything I've done professionally. And I think for the great majority of people, our children are partly our immortality. They're partly the most important part of our message. And so to have disease which prevents you having children is fundamentally very, very damaging.
Professor Lord Winston directs Britain's largest infertility clinic at Hammersmith Hospital, London. His pioneering work has helped hundreds of women become mothers through surgery, or IVF, in vitro fertilization, making a baby by test tube.
I suppose I got involved with reproductive medicine because it was regarded with such scorn by everybody else around me, and it seemed to me to be so badly done, really. And I thought that here was an area which has a great deal of science in it that is being untapped. And what we're currently doing with fertility medicine generally is so unbelievably crude. There must be a better way of doing it using some of the science.
For many of his new patients, Winston is their last hope.
About 3/4 of the patients that I see have already failed in vitro fertilization, usually on multiple occasions at another clinic, and they come to us out of desperation. And they are the most difficult patients to treat. They're very robe-weary, and also they don't have as good a chance of success because they've already had a lot of drugs, a lot of failure. You decided to throw your lot in with us? Or?
Yeah.
Despite the fact that I bully patients. They've done any scans before you started any treatment?
No, just the scans during my treatment.
And they did a laparoscopy?
Yeah.
And they found the sperm were a bit fewer than average in number?
It varied a lot, to be honest, Professor. It was
1 month
it was very good at times, and it was sort of mediocre at other times.
IVF has a very poor success rate. Patients on whose tubes I operate, a great majority of them will not get pregnant and so on. And the fact is that whichever infertility treatment you look at, most of the time, very few of these treatments will have as good as a 50% success rate. A few will, but most won't. So as a doctor, one of my problems is that I'm a dealer in disappointment.
Winston's unit, however, has an impressive track record, attracting patients worldwide.
IVF unit, Lorraine speaking, can I help you? Oh, hello.
Hi, I need to register.
Oh, right, yeah. So you've got a big blood test?
Yeah.
There's a critical period every month when the ovary will produce a ripe egg. And it's a very short period of time when that egg will be maximally capable of fertilization, about a 6-hour period every month. Now, what we do is to get as many eggs produced during that window of time as possible and monitor to make certain that we've got the right time, collect the eggs, and then we fertilize the eggs outside the body and put any fertilized eggs back into the womb.
If for whatever reason fertilization by test tube fails, there is another process whereby sperm can be injected directly into the egg using a powerful microscope with micromanipulators. A sperm is sucked up into a very fine needle pipette. The egg is gently maneuvered into position by the other fine holding needle. A great deal of skill and dedication is involved. The sperm is pushed to the end of the needle, which then pierces the egg's outer shell. Once in the center, the sperm is delicately expelled and the egg fertilized.
IVF can be a roller coaster because it's a kind of obstacle race. Some people find it so disagreeable experience that they never want to do it a second time. Most people find it bearable, and I think one doesn't want to exaggerate. And as I said, for some people, they feel better because they feel it's a matter of hope. Well, at least they feel there's a chance they can get pregnant that month.
Okay, I'm just going to put the speculum in now. It's going to be a little bit cold and wet. Okay. Okay, that's excellent. Well done. You did very, very well. Okay. So this is the womb, this is the lining of the womb, and this is the area where we just put the embryos back. Okay, all the catheters clear, so we're just going to take the speculum out now. A little bit uncomfortable.
Winston came to the Hammersmith as a registrar in 1970. He first made his name in medicine by revolutionizing the techniques of fallopian tubal surgery. He was appalled at trying to join two parts of a tube with the diameter of a cotton thread, with stitches visible to the naked eye. So he introduced microsurgery and turned failure into success. His medical peers were impressed.
Well, I first met Robert Winston years ago when we would both be going to scientific meetings on fertility studies, really. Robert's work, of course, was surgical. Mine was much more to do with hormones and the hormonal control of ovulation. And, you know, there's a natural divide between the approach of surgeons and physicians. And I always remember at the time being very impressed that Robert, though a surgeon and perfecting surgical skills, actually had a very experimental and scientific approach to all this. And it was actually the first time I'd heard surgeons giving papers of a very scientific nature, frankly, of the same sort of scientific quality that I had grown to expect.
I'm going to proceed, girls.
I think I was the first person to use the operating microscope for tubal surgery, and that in itself was a revolution. And what we tried to do was to develop a philosophy whereby you did minimal damage. So because people who are infertile and having their tubes or uterus operated on are very prone to have adhesions with the tissues getting stuck by scar tissue after operation, a huge amount of research went into trying to prevent that. And so in the late 60s, early 70s, I was researching that area very vigorously, mostly using animal models. And I think the techniques that we developed have now become pretty well universal. They were promulgated worldwide. They were considered very important. I think they're considered much less important now because people have this notion they want to bypass the tubes and just do in vitro fertilization. And I think that that's a sad reflection, actually, because it's clearly much better for somebody to get pregnant in bed than on an embryo transfer table.
This patient has come to Winston after several failed attempts at infertility treatments elsewhere. She has a blocked fallopian tube on one side, which Winston feels worth repairing. His aim is to remove the blocked part and rejoin the tube. It requires immense concentration by every member of his surgical team. The high magnification microscope now enables a fallopian tube measuring just 0.5 millimeter, to be joined up with absolute precision. At one time, a huge amount of blood was spilt during these operations. Nowadays, it's a lot if Winston even loses a teaspoonful. When it comes to tubal surgery, Winston is quite simply regarded as the best in his field. It has been a huge advantage. Fees from private patients are ploughed back into the unit to help fund poorer patients and vital research.
The technology that he introduced and perfected and insisted upon, in quite an obsessional way. These operations would take hours, you know. I think it was a typical piece of clinical science, that is to take a method which had clear advantages and then pursue it with obsessional zeal and come up with brilliant results, I have to say.
The key to the man and all his work is his background. For over 20 years he has been happily married to wife Lyra, whom he met when he re-established his Jewish roots in his early 30s. They have 3 children, Tanya, Joel, and Benjamin. Although working long hours at the hospital and teaching fertility studies at medical school, Winston traditionally devotes Friday evenings and Saturdays to them. He is a deeply religious man who thinks hard about moral issues, who feels passionately about human life, and has made it his purpose to make more of it.
Lord Winston is very much a family man, and it is one of the common bonds, I think, that unite us together. I think that his love of family has something to do with the particular choice of this field for his researchers, because the joys that are his through the blessing of a loving family, he'd like to share with others, and therefore make it possible for them, help to make it possible for them. And to that extent, I think he exudes a love of life, a commitment to the generation of life and to the protection of life. And these are all fundamental Jewish principles which I very much hail in him as representing what I might call Judaism in action. What is so remarkable about him is that, leading scientist as he is, that he's at the same time a strictly observant Jew, and allows his Jewish commitments to influence his medical decisions. And in that capacity I've known him mainly because we have from time to time discussed problems that arise in the course of his work. For instance, he's shown me over his unit in the Hammersmith Hospital and the method that he uses to ensure that the identity of the samples that he takes is absolutely foolproof, because we have to know for certain who this child is, because all our laws of incest are dependent on knowing who's the father, who's the mother, who's the brother, who's the sister. And therefore my concern, among others, was, for instance, in this area, that no mistakes are made, whereby you will not know afterwards the identity of the child. He is, moreover, of course, pursuing the ultimate Jewish imperative, which we regard as the first of all the 613 commandments in the Bible, to be fruitful and to multiply.
Sometimes Winston's views on medical ethics court controversy, like his decision to give in vitro fertilization to a woman infected with the AIDS virus.
This woman had been free of any serious disease for 10, 12 years. She's still alive now, 3 years later, and still well. And she was being refused infertility treatment elsewhere, as it happens. Her husband felt that she should be treated. She wanted to be treated. she recognized that she might get AIDS and that she might die. It was also quite clear that the risk to the baby would be about 8%, not more. That's much less than the risk of a genetic defect in many families who routinely go through having children. And I think once all those issues have been carefully thrashed out, yet again the autonomy of that particular patient comes into being, and we have to say, well, you know, we've given you the information. Who knows that round the corner there may be a treatment for HIV which will make you HIV negative, in which case you're not going to die of AIDS anyway. It's also equally true you might die of something else. It's also true that people die unexpectedly all the time. And I think to make an arbitrary decision to refuse a treatment would be playing God. Now, I was accused of playing God by offering the woman treatment. On the contrary, my view was that that's exactly what I was not doing. I was refusing to play God by being open-minded.
Winston and his team have also been in the vanguard of another important medical breakthrough: establishing the sex of a human embryo. This discovery prompted Winston to push a bill through Parliament, allowing experiments on embryos up to 14 days old.
We started to look at sex-linked diseases which affect boys but which are carried on the X chromosome of girls. And there are about 300 diseases which will affect boys. They include muscular dystrophy, haemophilia, but there are a whole range of these diseases, some of which are common, some of which are rare. And by 1989, we had a fairly reliable method of taking a cell away from the embryo, detecting its sex, and then putting back only girls in these families. And that work went well, and a number of girls were born to families who'd previously watched boys die of diseases. And by 1992, we've been able to extend that to a number of specific disorders. There's one disorder which is rather a rare disorder but causes terrible suffering in the children. It's a form of advanced spasticity. It's a genetic disease, and we were able to define this precise gene, identify it, and then transfer embryos which were free of that disease.
There was the whole issue of, can you do experiments on human embryos? And there is, of course, a body of opinion that says that at the moment of creation, at the moment of the union of the sperm and the egg, that the resulting pre-embryo has a soul. And of course, once you say it's ensouled, it becomes unacceptable to start experimenting on it. Nobody wants to do experiments on humans that cannot consent, and embryos can't consent.
Winston is a prolific writer and a great campaigner. In 1995, he was made a life peer for his contribution to reproductive medicine.
Well, I was very active in the late 80s in trying to get legislation which was permissive, because I believed fundamentally that what we were trying to do was for human good, not human evil. And so I was involved with writing a large number of submissions to politicians and civil servants, and seeing large numbers of the members of the House of Lords. I sat through all the parliamentary debates, and sometimes wanted to leap over the barrier and take part in the debates. I mean, ironically, a few years later, I can do that without leaping now. If we were able to research on fertilized eggs, we would be able to improve medical treatments for infertility, improve detection of genetic disease, improve the high loss of miscarriage which currently occurs, a loss of babies, improve their chances of survival, so have more healthy pregnancies, possibly improve contraceptive research. Lots of accusations were made that we were in the grips of drug company money, and that we were in some ways acting antithetically, that we had no religious or moral convictions. None of those things were true. no drug company money was involved at all, never has been actually in this area of research. And what rather threw our opponents was the recognition that some of the people who felt, as I did, actually had quite strong religious and moral views. I think that given a gift from God, given the ability to develop a technology, it's immoral not to use that technology if it can be used for human benefit.
Hello.
Hello, someone to see you.
Providing we're not creating designer children for frivolous reasons, I see no harm at all in trying to help those families
Oh, hello, Jack.
be free of diseases for future generations.
What's this? What's this?
I've got one patient at the moment, a woman who carries a cancer gene herself and has had 7 members of her family die from that cancer gene, all under the age of 30. And she's come to me saying that she'd like to get pregnant. She knows that she's going to die with cancer herself, probably in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe longer if she's lucky and if medical treatments hold out. But she'd like to have a pregnancy from a child that would be free of the worry that she's had all her life. Does that seem wrong? I would have thought that that would be highly sensible medicine.
Lord Winston undoubtedly is one of the enduring pioneers in embryology and all that goes with it of our times, and possibly will prove to be of all times. These are all areas that need creative minds to bring to bear principles that until then have either not been discovered or have not been tried. And as such, I think his place in the history of embryology, of treatment of infertility, will be immortal.
People foolishly say to me, how can you bring more children into the world when there's such an overpopulation problem? Completely misunderstanding what the whole work's about. This work isn't about overpopulating the world. In fact, the world's population problem will be helped by our science, not hindered by it.
Behind nearly every one of these photographs is the story of a birth, the result of the remarkable skills of Winston and his specialist team.
We heard about the wall of death, and this is a wall of life. I suppose it's a rather different concept. It's not circular, perhaps it should be, because life is a continuum, of course. I think it's one of the important aspects to our work. I think our work is partly important because we are acting within that continuum. You know, there's a notion that we're creating life, and we're not, because to do so would be, in fact, subverting God. That would be subverting, that would be overtaking what God does. So what we're using is the tools of creation. We're using what already exists, the egg and the sperm, to help life exist. And I see that as wholly good, really. And I think it's a privilege to be involved with it in a small way.